On September 3, 1942, something unexpected happened over the Eastern Front that would change how women were seen in combat forever. German pilots heard a sound they had never encountered before in war, a low, distant buzz cutting through the night sky. They looked up, searching the darkness. They saw nothing at first, only the sound growing closer. Then, moments later, explosions erupted beneath them. Ammunition dumps ignited, supply lines burned, ground forces scattered in confusion. When the German pilots finally managed to track down the source of the attack, they saw something that made them question their own eyes. The aircraft attacking them were flying so low you could see the pilots' silhouettes in the cockpit. And those pilots were women. The Nazis called them Nachthexen, the night witches. And within weeks, the German high command would become so terrified of them that they issued standing orders to shoot on sight, creating dedicated night fighter squadrons just to stop them. This is the story of how 40 young Soviet women became the pilots that Nazi Germany feared most. To understand the night witches, you have to understand what the Soviet Union was facing in 1942. Germany had invaded in June of 1941. By September of that year, Hitler's armies had pushed deep into Soviet territory, capturing millions of square kilometers and killing millions of soldiers. The casualties were beyond comprehension. In the opening months of the war alone, the Soviets lost more men than the United States would lose in the entire war. The Soviet Air Force had been devastated in those opening months, thousands of aircraft shot down, thousands of pilots dead. Some entire regiments were wiped out in single engagements. The Germans dominated the skies completely. Any Soviet aircraft that flew during daylight hours was hunted and destroyed. The Soviets were losing the air war so badly that their generals wondered if they could win at all. They were desperate for air power, but they had lost so many pilots that replacements were almost impossible to find. Then, in the spring of 1942, a Soviet pilot named Marina Raskova had an idea that would have been considered radical in any country, but was practically unthinkable in the military establishment of the time. She proposed creating all-female aviation regiments, not as support units, not as auxiliary forces, but as combat squadrons that would fly bombing and reconnaissance missions against the Germans. She believed women could fly combat aircraft just as well as men, and the Soviet Union needed pilots badly enough to try it. She knew it would face opposition. The Soviet military was conservative, the culture was deeply traditional, but she also knew that her country was dying. 2 million Soviet soldiers were already dead. Millions more were captured or missing. Something had to change. The Soviet command was skeptical. Women in combat? It violated every military tradition. It violated every cultural norm. But they were also losing the war and they were desperate. So in 1941, the Soviet Air Force officially formed 3 all-female aviation regiments. The 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment would eventually become the most famous. These women were not trained fighter pilots. Many of them had only a few hundred hours of flight time. Some had never flown anything more demanding than a training aircraft. But they had courage, and they had something else that mattered more. They had access to an aircraft that almost no one wanted to fly. The Polikarpov U-2 was a biplane, made of wood and canvas. The design was from before World War I. It had been around since 1927. It had no armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no protection of any kind. It was slow, incredibly slow. Top speed maybe 90 miles per hour. For a combat aircraft in 1942, it was practically obsolete. German fighter pilots considered it an insult to be ordered to shoot down a U-2. It was so slow, so defenseless, that taking credit for destroying one was considered dishonorable. The German Air Force called them Tante Ju or Aunt Ju, as if they were not even worth acknowledging as real aircraft. Some German pilots refused to engage them because they thought it was beneath them. Others joked about it in mess halls. It seemed inconceivable that an aircraft this ancient could ever pose a threat. But this weakness became the Night Witch's greatest strength. The pilots of the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment realized that the U-2 was too slow to be intercepted at night. German night fighters were designed to chase fast-moving bombers flying at high altitude. They could not operate at the slow speeds the U-2 flew at. The aircraft's slow speed became an advantage, not a disadvantage. So the Soviet women developed a completely new tactical approach to bombing. They would fly at night, at altitudes so low that soldiers on the ground could hear them coming. They would fly so low that Nadezhda Popova, one of the most famous night witches, later recalled being able to hear German soldiers talking below her as she flew past. Some accounts suggest pilots could hear rifle fire from the ground. The noise from the engine was so distinctive that German soldiers started calling them the Night Witches, before the pilots even knew they had a name. The missions were extraordinary. A single pilot would fly 15, sometimes 18 bombing runs in a single night. She would take off, fly to the target, drop her bombs, return to base, reload, refuel, and take off again. All in darkness. All in an aircraft that seemed to drift through the night like a ghost. The strain on the pilots was immense. They flew exhausted. They flew frightened. Many of them experienced so much stress during the war that they suffered nervous breakdowns, though they continued flying anyway. The pilots developed a dark humor about their missions. They joked about the odds. They made bets about who would return. Some kept diaries, writing down their thoughts in the hours between flights. The writings show women who knew they might die, but who chose to fly anyway. Nadezhda Popova was perhaps the most famous of all the night witches. She joined the regiment at age 20. By the end of the war, she had completed 860 bombing runs. That is almost 900 times that she took off into the night over enemy territory. 860 times that she might not have returned. She was shot down twice. She bailed out over enemy territory twice. Once she became separated from her unit and had to fly her damaged aircraft back across German lines at an altitude of only 50 feet, dodging trees and terrain in the darkness, trying to find her way home in a crippled aircraft. She survived the entire war. After the war, when she was finally interviewed by historians decades later, she was matter-of-fact about it. She said she had been afraid, but fear did not stop the war, so fear was not useful. You simply had to do what needed doing. She lived until 2013, more than 70 years after the war ended. In her final years, she spoke to young people about the war, making sure her story was not forgotten. The German response to the Night Witches was unlike their response to any other Soviet unit. The High Command issued special orders. The pilots were not to engage them in honorable combat. They were to be destroyed on sight by any means necessary. Night fighter squadrons were created specifically to hunt them. The order went out that any German pilot who could bring down a night witch would receive a medal. The message was clear. The Nazis were terrified of these women. They feared them so much that they devoted resources to stopping them, resources that could have been used elsewhere. A handful of women in wooden aircraft were diverting German military attention and resources. But there was something else happening too, something the German command did not quite understand. Many German night fighter pilots refused to engage the Night Witches, not for tactical reasons, for personal ones. A night witch was a woman. Deliberately shooting down a woman in combat seemed dishonorable to many German pilots, trained in a military culture that valued a certain code of conduct. They would find excuses, engine trouble, navigation errors, ammunition problems, anything to avoid the order to attack the women pilots. The cultural weight of attacking women proved to be stronger than military hierarchy, even in the German Air Force. Some pilots claimed they never saw them. Others reported equipment failure at crucial moments. It is one of the great ironies of the war that the Night Witches were sometimes protected not by their skill, but by the reluctance of their enemies to shoot women. By 1943, the Night Witches had become legend on the Eastern Front. Soviet troops would see them flying overhead at night and know that German positions nearby would soon be under attack. German soldiers would hear the distinctive sound of the U-2 engines and scatter because the Night Witches were devastatingly accurate. They flew so low that they could place bombs with precision. They destroyed ammunition depots, fuel supplies, artillery positions, and airfields. They disrupted German operations on a level that their numbers did not suggest was possible. German commanders began to understand that these women were not a novelty or a propaganda stunt. They were an effective combat unit. The 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment flew almost 24,000 combat sorties during the war. That is nearly 24,000 bombing runs in darkness, in an aircraft made of wood and canvas, against an enemy that was trying to kill them. 40 pilots served in the regiment at various times. 23 were killed in combat. That is a casualty rate of 58%. In the history of aviation warfare, few units have experienced such losses, and yet they continued flying. They kept taking off into the night. They kept coming back with stories of near misses and narrow escapes. They kept doing their duty. The most famous of the night witches, beyond Nadezhda Popova, was a pilot named Yekaterina Budanova. She claimed to have shot down 2 German aircraft in aerial combat, which would have made her a fighter ace. Whether the claims were exactly accurate is debated by historians, but what is not debated is her bravery. She was shot down multiple times. She crash-landed her aircraft so hard that she broke her spine. She flew again after that, flying combat missions with a broken back. She was killed in 1943 when her aircraft collided with a German fighter in darkness. She was 23 years old. She had been flying for only a year. By the end of the war in 1945, the Night Witches had won recognition and medals from the Soviet Union. Every pilot in the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment was awarded medals for bravery. Many received the Order of the Red Star, one of the highest honors in the Soviet military. The women had proven that they could fight as well as any man. They had proven that courage has no gender. But when Stalin came to power more firmly after the war, he began rewriting history. Female pilots were deemed incompatible with Soviet ideology. The image of women as delicate caregivers did not match women as combat pilots. The Night Witches were quietly removed from official histories. Textbooks did not mention them. Films did not show them. For decades they were forgotten, treated as if they had never existed. The sacrifice they had made was erased from the historical record. It was not until the 1980s and 1990s, long after the Soviet Union had collapsed, that historians were able to recover the stories of the Night Witches. Researchers found the old Soviet documents gathering dust in archives. They tracked down surviving pilots. They conducted interviews with women now in their 70s and 80s, women who had flown in the war and had watched their own stories disappear. Slowly, the truth emerged again from the historical record. The world learned what the Night Witches had done. The world learned that women had fought in combat on the Eastern Front. The world learned that these women had been some of the most fearless pilots of the war. Today, the Night Witches are celebrated in Russia as heroes. Monuments have been erected in their honor. Books have been written about them. Documentaries have been made. The aircraft they flew in, the Polikarpov U-2, is preserved in museums around the world. And the names of the pilots, Nadezhda Popova, Yekaterina Budanova, Raisa Aronova, and the others, are remembered as pioneers, not just of aviation, but of women's role in warfare. Schools teach about them. Young people study their lives. They are no longer forgotten, but their story is also a reminder of something else. It is a reminder that courage and sacrifice exist regardless of gender. It is a reminder that when a nation faces existential crisis, when survival is at stake, the categories that societies use to divide people become less important than the need to survive. The Soviet Union allowed women to fight because it needed every pilot it could get. The Night Witches flew because their country needed them to fly, and they did both with a bravery that earned them respect from their enemies, recognition from their commanders, and a place in history that should never be forgotten. September 3rd, 1942, was the day that the sound of wooden aircraft engines and female voices changed warfare on the Eastern Front forever. It was the day that the Night Witches proved that courage has no gender. It was the day that made the German High Command realize that the most dangerous enemy sometimes comes from the most unexpected place. And it was the day that proved women belonged anywhere that bravery was needed. The story of the Night Witches is a searing reminder that true courage knows no gender, and true strength often arises from the most underestimated places. They faced absolute terror in obsolete planes, endured unimaginable losses, and became the very definition of resilience. Their legacy was nearly erased by politics, but the truth always finds a way to fly back. Now, I have two questions for you. What is the wooden biplane in your own life? What is the outdated, difficult challenge that you can turn into your greatest advantage, just as these women did? How do you choose to remember them? Join the conversation and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If the sacrifice of these 40 women moved you, and if you believe their history must never be silenced again, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story of defiance. And if you want more deeply researched historical narratives that uncover the true measure of human courage, subscribe to our channel and join our community. We owe it to the Night Witches to ensure their story, and the stories of all forgotten heroes, fly on. Thank you for listening.